here we are. This is Sex Love Psychedelics, and I'm your host, Dr. Kat. Bringing you psychosexual conversations that will leave you intellectually turned on and hungry for more.
Circling this back to relationships, like how do you see, this openness versus closeness? How do you see this? And because you wrote that book, 80 Marriage. Yeah. How do you see this impacting relationships?
Oh man, so much. So for that book, we interviewed about 100 people about their marriage. We wanted to really understand the state of modern relationships.
Sure.
And I would say the number one complaint that came up was about digital distraction. So the story we would hear again and again is some version of, I'm with my spouse, it's before bed, and we're both sitting on opposite sides of the bed. I've got my tablet, my spouse has their phone, we're scrolling Instagram or whatever, doom scrolling the news. And that there's a way in which a lot of couples are just getting locked into these patterns of distraction and connecting a lot with their phones, but not really connecting a lot with each other.
Yeah.
The other really interesting stat that I think kind of blew my mind, John Gottman talks a lot about this, that they did some research at UCLA and found couples with kids spend on average about 35 minutes a week connecting with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is like, what, 5 minutes a day? That's crazy, right? So I think that there is this kind of closure that's happening in relationships. And so just to be able to take a step back as a couple and ask questions like, hey, are we setting aside intentional time free from our devices where we can connect? That's a huge move. I think even like the meta move there of what we saw is that a lot of couples are sort of doing relationship by accident. So, we're just going to let random historical accident, gender norms from the 1950s define our relationship. Instead of the move there is like doing relationship more intentionally, having conversations like what's working, what's not working, how can we restructure things. That kind of practice can be hugely valuable for couples.
I agree. And I think, there you may come up against conflict or disagreement. And if we don't have the skills to be able to navigate conversations like that, then it makes sense why we would want to just go to our screens and our Instagrams to avoid that, the discomfort that requires of asking questions of ourselves and partners.
Yeah. Well, and then on top of this, as you know, there's all this talk now about the sexual recession, or even I've heard it called the sexual Great Depression.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting, right? Like you look at the statistics on how many times the average couple has sex, and right around 2007, when the smartphone is introduced, these numbers start to just plummet. And I think that's super interesting. Like, I don't know what the causal connection is there. Can we blame it all on social media and smartphone? Maybe not, but whatever's happening, it seems like the trend line is moving toward both disconnection emotionally, but also we're not having sex as much, which is bizarre to me because like this is probably the most pleasurable thing available to human beings, and yet we'd rather be on Instagram. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, sex is vulnerable. Sex requires us to be in our bodies, and if that's an uncomfortable place to be, or we don't know how to self-regulate, or if we don't know how to have vulnerable conversations, like, it's going to be shitty sex. It might not be pleasant.
Totally. Well, we like to say, I'm sure you believe this as well, that like what happens in the bedroom is just a mirror of what happens in the rest of your life. So, we like to think of sex as like this disconnected realm from everything else. But like really what's happening in line at Costco is what's happening in the bedroom. So if you're experiencing a relationship where you really are kind of like checking out from each other and on your devices all the time and trying to like avoid each other, then that's exactly what's going to happen in the bedroom. Like it's no coincidence that those two are going to match.
We see we see a lot of that overlap and patterns of dissociation or patterns of trying to regulate through our partner by sex and consciously putting pressure on our partner. We don't realize it, we don't mean it, but we're like, I'm dysregulated, I'm anxious, let's have sex. And then, then the other person not being able to vocalize what they need or speak up. And you're absolutely right. We see so much overlap of these patterns here.
Well, that was fun. Thanks for tuning in, lovers. And if you want to experience more ecstasy and sexual liberation, head over to sexlovepsychedelics.com and learn about how you can join me for any one of my online or live events. And while you're there, grab my free guide on sex and psychedelics. Remember, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please contact your healthcare provider and local law before pursuing any of the products or psychedelics discussed. And one final note here. I make this show specifically for you. If you're loving the show, then be sure to leave me a review in iTunes or Spotify to let me know. Happy to be here and happy to serve. I'll see you next time on Sex Love Psychedelics.